Great. Good afternoon, folks. This is President Palmer, and we are in the DCA boardroom on 9th Street. And also we have got Zoom room people, so that's good to have the attendance here. So let's have a call to order first. And that's me. So would you please do a roll call?
Gladly. President Palmer.
Here.
Vice President Millibar.
Here.
Director Martin.
Here.
Director Atwater. Director Stamera. Director Chang.
Here.
Dowie. Let me go back and see. Give me one moment. So I do see that Tony is on. Director Estremera?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Director Anaptawi? Yeah, he has joined. We have alternate director Lamoreau, who I believe is Mr. Chang's alternate.
Once we finish with the roll, why don't we acknowledge the alternates who are here as well? Okay.
John Weed.
So now we'll take a moment and acknowledge who we have on the line as well as alternate directors. So starting, we have alternate director Weed on the line.
Thank you.
We have alternate director Lamoreau.
Here. And I'm an alternate for Director Anatawi.
Okay, thank you. I believe so, Sarah.
Great, then if you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America.
Republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God, indivisible,
justice for all.
justice for all.
Okay, then continuing on, we are now getting into item number 4, which is public comment. Members of the public may address the authority on matters that are within the authority's jurisdiction, whether they are on or off the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. However, the chair may limit this time when reasonable based on the circumstances. Persons wishing to speak may do so remotely through the electronic meeting link or teleconference number when recognized by the chair, me. Okay, so we have 3 different minutes, and Josh, can we approve all of these minutes at the same time?
Yes, Director Palmer, before we jump to the minutes, I think we should just double check and make sure there aren't any public comments on general public comment.
Sorry, I didn't see anything here. So do we have public comments?
President Palmer, at this time, we do not have any public comment requests.
I think Palmer answered your question on the minutes. That can be approved by a single motion. It's the board's pleasure.
I just wanted to let people know that Director Atwater is here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have August 18th, September 15th, and October 14th. And do I have a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion, President Palmer.
Okay.
I'll make a motion.
Great.
Motion to approve.
And well, if nobody else does, I'm seconding.
I'll
so-
second it.
Okay, great. You guys got to be faster on this, okay? At any rate, let's go ahead and I think if there's anybody who is against this, we can just say assume that everybody else is in favor. So is there anyone who has any reservations about any of the minutes? None? Okay, the minutes are passed. All done.
President Palmer, I apologize. We are required because it's a hybrid meeting to do a roll call vote.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote because of the hybrid meeting.
Gladly. And this is for all 3 meeting minutes, correct?
All 3 meeting
Okay.
minutes.
So
I know that there were just a couple of little typos that were corrected, and those are all taken care of, so
President Palmer,
you bet, yes.
Director Millibar,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Atwater,
Yes.
Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
and alternate Director LaMoreau.
Yes.
Great.
Items on the consent calendar considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion, one vote. No separate discussion for these items unless the director so requests. All right, so do we have a motion to accept the one item on this consent calendar?
Motion to approve.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
President Palmer,
Yes.
Director Millibar,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Atwater,
Yes.
Director Stamera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
and alternate Director LaMoreau.
Yes.
Excellent.
Oh, sure, sorry about that. Project, do my teacher voice. You got it, okay. So moving on to item number 7, and there are 3 items here. 7D has been removed from the agenda. It will be added to a future agenda. So we have items A, B, and C, and 2 of them are for information only, and 1 is for potential adoption of the resolution. So let's start with that, please.
President Palmer, good afternoon. So let's start, Claudia, if we could please, summary of work. So I'll highlight a couple of items for the September 22 activities. First, starting with the program management side of things, we continue to process invoices for fiscal year 21 and 22, as well as, but we're in the process of wrapping that up. I'll get into that when I review some of the budget summaries. At the same time, we've got our current fiscal year 22-23 processing task orders, amendments, purchase orders well underway. So the fiscal year is well underway. On the administrative side, we continue our support for all of our directors and coordination of any DCA activities and events. One thing that I would like to point out that we are in the process of transitioning our video conferencing and phone provider, so that procurement is underway, and I'm hopeful that by the time we meet next in December, that will be switched over to the new platform, which is Zoom. So that is underway. On the engineering front, we continue to prioritize our support for DWR's permitting activities. So there continues to be a steady stream of requests for information, clarification on the provided conceptual designs, any of the backup information that we've provided for the impact analyses. The geotechnical elements of the engineering team continue to work very closely with the fieldwork team. The geotechnical team is continuing to review existing data and data that's coming in through the subsurface investigations, continuing to support DWR's consideration of alternatives, as well as better understanding conditions delta-wide. Fieldwork activities have been pretty active. We've got Damaris Villalobos here, who will be updating you as part of item 7B, so I won't steal her thunder, but we have several activities that are ongoing and look forward to that presentation. So Claudia, please, if we could go to budget summary, section 3. Now we have modified the monthly report this month to include not only financials from the current fiscal year 22-23, but we've got an addendum set of financials, which we'll also review, that are for last fiscal year 21-22. Reason being, we do have an active task order that we extended from last fiscal year up to now. We should be winding that down, but as we get close to that, I wanted to bring back the financials for 21-22 so that we could update the board. But first we'll start with 22-23. We've got an approved budget of $31.16 million authorized by the board back in June of this year. At this point, we have committed just over 27 million, so the vast majority of that budget has been committed and is currently underway. The balance that has yet to be committed is the unallocated reserve within the executive office, a little bit of budget within community engagement, and then the majority is within the fieldwork section of program initiation task or program initiation phase. If you recall, we are issuing task orders based on investigation programs. And so I do fully expect that we will expend that entire fieldwork budget by the time we get to the end of the fiscal year. This is just representing that we've issued a few task orders, but we still have a few more to go on the fieldwork side. Right now, we're projecting an estimate at completion of our full budget. We'll be doing a more rigorous analysis when we get halfway through the year. So probably in the January, February timeframe, we'll have a better handle on our projections and start to reflect what we think might be an estimate at completion that's a bit more informed. Right now, we're still assuming we're going to fully expend the budget. Okay, could we go now to the cash flow, which is the next, I think, at the end of this section, before we go to the FY 21-22 budget. Great. Yep, thank you. We've got it now. So this is our plot of projected monthly expenses compared to actuals, as well as the planned cumulative and cumulative actuals. So the two bars are referencing the axis on the left-hand side. So you can see the monthly expenditures in terms of planned and actuals. The right-hand side axis is for the two cumulative lines, the blue line being essentially just the sum of all the blue bars, and the pink dash line being the sum of the yellow bars. So far this year, for July, we were pretty close to projected. I think by the time the dust settles on August and we get in all remaining invoices, some of the field work still lags a little bit in terms of invoicing. I'm actually expecting our actuals to be pretty close to projected, but we'll see how that goes. And I do expect that we're going to continue to show similar matching of projections probably through September, October, November. Things just take a while to trickle in. Okay, Claudia, let's go next to FY 21-22. So this is the new section that we've added to the monthly report for this month. This is reflecting back on the 21-22 financials. So I'm sure this board recalls we had a starting budget last year of 21.5 million. Then in July and later in January of last fiscal year, we rolled over all the underrun from previous fiscal years. So our total budget was up to 24.47 million. That's where it was when we ended the fiscal year in June. So as part of the authorization for the current fiscal year budget, we moved over 3.11 million from FY 21-22 into 22-23. So we've reduced the budget shown for last fiscal year down to 21.364 million. Even still, we're tracking the projections and we have a more recent estimate at completion. At this point, we only have one open task order for FY 21-22, and we should be completing all that work by the end of October. So we're getting a pretty tight EAC at this point, and we actually have a little bit of additional underrun compared to where we left things in June. Now we're projecting an underrun remaining still underneath the 21.36 of about 3.3 million. So the total underrun, if you think about where we would have been in June had we, sort of in the previous reporting, the total number of underrun would be the 3.11 that we moved out of this budget plus the 3.279 that we're still showing. So it's a total cumulative underrun of about 6.4 million. But 3.1 we moved over to the current year. Okay, so cash flow, please, would be the next plot, just to see, I think if there's any, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. So here we show you can see the blue trend lines, and I just do want to point out, you can see June, we very closely matched our projected. That's a point at which we were really in full swing with the Springfield program. And so a lot of the difference between projected and actuals over the past year has been a lot of the effort associated with the field work. So we were fully in swing and we were pretty close to projections there. And if you trace the blue line, you see it drops down. That's us moving 3.11 out of the budget. And then it tracks along at the 21 and change. And then our pink line is where we are for current actuals, and that will continue to pick up a few additional actuals through the rest of the extended task order through the end of October. So Claudia, just lastly, let's jump to the schedule. So in terms of our current fiscal year schedule, our program management office activities continue as planned. We've got the supporting activities that I described earlier at the beginning of the monthly report. The engineering team continues with the primary focus on permitting support, as well as advancing several of the conceptual or concept validation studies. The geotechnical team, as Damaris is going to describe, has got 3 programs active in various phases, and that's what's reflected on the lower half of the schedule in green, is just the sequencing on those different programs and the different activities associated with those programs. So with that completes my summary of the monthly report, but welcome any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Yes, President Palmer, just one quick one. And Graham, great presentation. I like the visuals. So I guess one of the questions I had was, how typically far does the payment lag the invoices? Because, I see, like you say, I mean, obviously it doesn't, track by month, but is it a couple of months? Is it 3 months? You probably have answered this before, so you can just refresh my memory.
Question you're asking, how does the payment lag the invoicing, or is it when does the invoicing lag the labor?
Be a little bit both.
Yeah, so in terms of how long it takes us to turn around payment times on the invoices, it can be 80 days, that type of time frame. We have a pretty complicated process that we need to work through, but that would be fairly typical, on the order of 80 days between when we receive the invoice, work it through our processes through DWR, then receive payment and issue payment back out to the contractors with the DCA. In terms of the lag between when labor was maybe when labor occurred versus when it actually gets invoiced to us, we're pretty diligent about trying to keep our contractors up to date. We want to see, we want them to get reimbursed for their expenses and for their labor. What we do see, though, is a reality with the field work in that some of the subs who are sub-consultants of the primary contractors, they're very busy, they're out in the field, they may lag a bit on when they actually get their invoices to their prime contractor, and depending on the sequence of that, it may not get picked up in that invoice, it gets picked up in the next one. So it just is a series of things that can create a bit of a lag between when things actually occurred and when they make it to us in an invoice, and then we have a very routine process for taking those in and paying them.
Problem that you've heard from with the folks that we're working with?
No problems. I think we're working through things. We just want to make sure that all of our contractors are getting paid on a timely basis, and also that they're submitting invoices on a timely basis.
Directors with questions? I don't see any hands, no. How about public comment? Do we have any public comment on this?
President Palmer, at this time, we have not received any public comment or requests for any of the items on the agenda.
Okay, great. So let's move on to 7B, fieldwork activities, program update, please.
President Palmer, I'll introduce Damaris Villalobos. She's our field exploration manager. I think you all have met her probably 6 or 7 months ago, but we welcome her back to provide this update.
Thank you, Graham. So I'm pretty excited to provide you an update on the geotechnical field exploration program. I know you've heard about it, kind of an overview, but now I'm going to go into more detail. It's going to be a brief presentation, but I'll be open for questions at the end. So next slide. So just as a reminder, the field exploration program goals include determining the composition, location, and soil properties throughout the Delta, And I'll talk about these soil properties and the data obtained during the exploration program in a minute as I move forward with the presentation. Second goal is to provide geotechnical and environmental data for the evaluation of project alternatives. And then thirdly, to update the ongoing geologic models by filling in data gaps. And I'll also talk about these data gaps in a minute. Next slide, please, Claudia. Yeah, so all of the, before I go into the completed explorations and the ongoing explorations, all of the explorations that we're doing right now are part of the initial study and mitigated negative declaration, or ISMND, adopted in July 2020 and subsequently updated with addenda. And I want to focus your attention to the map on the right, which includes all of those explorations that are covered and part of the ISMND. They are illustrated in there by symbology. The yellow triangles indicating the land borings, the green circles indicating the comb penetration tests, and the blue squares indicating the overwater borings. So there's a total of 326 covered under the ISMND. Now, also, you can see in the map to the right that the soil investigation program includes a wide area of potential exploration locations throughout the Delta. However, at this point, I would like to point out that not all of these explorations have been completed, and this is because completion of each exploration is contingent upon availability of appropriate approvals, additional permitting, and accessibility. So keep that in mind as I move forward with the presentation. Next slide. So how does the exploration program looks like in numbers? So up to this date, we've completed about 33% of those explorations covered under the ISMND. And about 50% of these 33%, which is 107, were completed after fall of 2021. And it's indicated in the blue boxes in there. There are additional 69 that we're planning on doing ongoing and planning on doing next calendar year. We are right now in the midst of the fall exploration program. With this table, I also wanted to show you kind of the distribution of how soil borings compare to comb penetration tests. So usually, but not always, it's a mix, 60 to 40% borings to comb penetration tests, but it's not always the case. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, one of the goals of the exploration program is to update ongoing geologic models by filling in data gaps. And I wanted to use these images to show what we mean by these data gaps. So if we focus our attention to the map on the left and going back in time to historical explorations, you're gonna see all of these explorations are not part of the Delta Conveyance Project or any of its iterations, but it's just historical data that were obtained in the past as part of other projects. Now, for context, the sweet spot for the vertical alignment for the proposed tunnel, it's at approximately 150 feet. So all of that information, the boring and CPT information that is most useful to the geotechnical engineers and the geotechnical team and the engineers are those explorations that are located at approximately 150 feet, more or less. So all of the blue dots that you see in the map on the left are shallow explorations, less than 150 feet. And you see some sporadic yellow dots that indicate those deeper explorations that are 100 feet or deeper. So you can see that if we look at the different alternatives, alignment alternatives, there are significant data gaps. So now moving our attention to the map on the right, I'm just pointing out what are these data gaps. And moving forward in time a little bit more, from 2009 to 2021, part of this project, the Delta project, as well as past iterations, the intent was to obtain data throughout the Delta, but also focus on some of those alignments that was deep at 150 feet or more. You can see that there were significant explorations done along the central alignment, but there are significant gaps on the eastern and Bethany reservoir alignment. So that is one of the goals of this, of the exploration, the current exploration program. Next slide. Now, the map to the left shows the completed explorations since I came on board at the beginning of this year. They include, we're doing this by seasons. So we completed the spring 2022 season in June of this year. And we completed the summer 2022 season at the end of September. And you can see there that the intent is to try to fill in these data gaps in order to update the ongoing geologic models. Now moving forward in time for the ongoing and the proposed explorations, you can see in the map on the right that that's the intent as well, to continue filling those data gaps so that we can more completely analyze all of the different alternatives. Can we go to the next slide? So as I mentioned earlier, another goal of the field exploration program is basically to determine composition, location, and soil properties throughout the Delta. And I'm not going to go over this whole list, but I just wanted to show you some of the information that we're obtaining. We're doing two types of tests, laboratory tests, where we're basically grabbing soil samples and sending them to the lab, as well as in situ tests, which are done on site. So in terms of laboratory tests, some of the tests that we're doing, this is not an all-inclusive list, but includes, for example, gradation and fines content, Adderberg limit, triaxial consolidated and unconsolidated, direct shear, various rock strength tests. And the way these analyze basically help us with the project features, so understand project features, is for tunneling method and tunneling machine selection, liquefaction assessment, dewatering and slurry walls, to understand and assess levees and embankments for the different alternatives, understand foundations, retaining walls, and to understand tunnels and shafts. Next slide. These are some just additional laboratory tests. You can see on the left, consolidation, corrosion, radiocarbon dating, environmental, soil abrasivity, and they are also related to some of the same project features that I mentioned before, foundations to understand levees and embankments, selection of fill materials, and to do soil and site geologic characterization. Next slide. So I mentioned that there are also some in situ tests that we're doing. Some examples include standard penetration tests, cone penetration test resistances, pressure meter, seismic CPTs, PS logging, CPT for pressure dissipation. And these are related to the project features in understanding liquefaction assessment, ground improvement methodologies, foundation, levees and embankments assessment, tunnel and shafts, retaining walls, the water and slurry walls, and tunnels and shafts. I believe I said that before. Next slide. With that, I'm open for questions at this point.
I have a question. Has there been any collaboration with USGS, or is USGS able to get some of this information? So I think this is something that should be basically archived at some point, because this is a very interesting, I mean, enough of a data geek to love this stuff, but it seems to me that this is something that USGS would be very interested in. So I'm wondering if there's been any ability to collaborate with them.
Thanks for the question. I'm not aware. I don't know if you, Graham, can answer that question.
So I think that there has been some, Chair Palmer, in collecting the historic information, there has been some back and forth, but I also would expect there to be continued coordination, and that's probably something that would be better managed between agency to agency, so likely to be coordinated through DWR. Yeah, agreed.
Demery, thank you for the presentation and the kind of, I'm having flashback to the soils class back in college, so I appreciate it. I had a number of questions regarding, a few of the details, if you don't mind. So I think you mentioned that there's like 326, of these, borings / CPT that's covered under the EIR. Does the EIR make a differentiation between, whether, I mean, could you conceivably do 326 CPTs if you had the money and the need? I guess, that's one question, because it seemed like it's more intrusive, right? But also a lot more costly.
So if I could, just to make a correction, it's under the ISM&D.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Right. But again, I don't want to preempt an answer, Demery, but I'm assuming with your focus on implementation, I should answer this. Okay. I think we have a couple of factors that we consider in terms of executing the program. We do have distribution of points all across the Delta, as you heard Demarest describing. Not all of them are accessible. Many of them are on private land that require temporary entry permit or court-ordered entry access. So that has been part of the process. The other real key part of the process, when we started the ISMND, we did not have the full database of historical data available yet. That's been something we've been building continuously over the past several years. And when you overlay all of those points that were identified in the ISMND on top of all of that existing historic data, some of those points no longer become necessary. And so we have tried to focus on the areas where there continue to be gaps, as you saw the information that Demarest proposed or showed. So that continues to be our focus in those areas of gaps.
Maybe just kind of continue, with the question. So I think, I think in one of your graphics you showed, the existing data, and then you show like the new set of data. I guess one of my questions is, I would assume like, the ones on the left were done some years ago. And so I guess my question kind of focuses on how long ago were they done? And, with the passage of time, does technology actually get better so that, the data that you get now are a little bit more reliable? So I guess there's some of that, right? And then, beyond that, like you say, there's just, simply the coverage issue. Maybe the borings are not exactly in the areas that you want. Then I guess, the next question is, okay, so how do you make a determination whether, you do a boring or you do a CPT? And then what the relative costs are? Sorry, I mean, there's a lot of questions embedded in here, but.
Take that as well. So I guess first to start with the historic data, much of this data, a lot of this data was collected back in the 50s as part of the Department of Water Resources salinity barrier work. So there was a lot of work done in the Delta. So when you look at those drawing, the drawing on the left, and you see a lot of holes that seem to follow the perimeter of various islands, that's all done in the mid 50s, around 1955, 56, 57. Those are generally shallow data points. They do provide value. All of this information has the potential to provide value, especially when evaluating key shallow conditions like the depth and thickness of peat or what is the consistency of the near surface soils. So they do certainly provide benefit to understanding delta-wide conditions, and they certainly provide benefit to our program where we have surface structures. In collecting all of that data, we used a screening process because there's a lot of data that there's a lot of records that are collected that are not useful. And so because they don't either, but you're right, the technology has improved, standards have improved, but even some of the older data still has significant value depending on the quality of the documentation and how much testing was done to validate the classifications. So we had a screening process that we used to evaluate the data, put it into different buckets in terms of whether it was useful to us and so on. And if it met certain criteria, we then input it into our database and it goes into the model of delta-wide conditions. But yes, as technology evolves, the more recent data generally tends to be better, but it's really more kind of modern data. So it's very possible that data from 20 or 30 years ago can still be very useful. Then I think in terms of making decisions about what type of investigation we do, CPT versus boring, that really depends on the input from the engineering team in terms of what they're looking for and what type of gaps exist. There's certain types of data that you can only collect with one tool or the other. And so depending on the type of gap we're dealing with, that's, it's kind of a case-by-case evaluation. Borings do tend to be, they are more expensive than cone penetration tests. I mean, just for comparison, it probably takes about 4 or 5 times as long to complete a boring of the same length as a CPT. So just, you can infer probably the cost differential there. So I think that answers the questions. Was there any other questions?
So, sorry to hog up all the time here, but so, as you kind of corrected me, so, there's 326 that's allowed, under the ISMND. Do we anticipate going up all the way up to 326 because I see, under the numbers that you provided is about 40% of that number.
We do not intend to go to all the points identified in the ISM&D, mainly because of the continued evaluation of data gaps. So some of those locations really just aren't going to be necessary at this point. And, the ISM&D is intended to support the work being done under the ISM&D is supporting DWR's evaluation of alternatives and just general conditions overall. And so I expect that over the next year or so, we intend to complete the work that Damaris described. So we've identified the points that we think are going to still contribute. What was not mentioned in Damaris's summary is there has been work completed before her tenure, and there was a previous presentation by Andrew Finney that summarized some of that work. So she just picked up where Andrew had left off. So she didn't go back and do a complete summary of all the work.
Work data will be useful in terms of determining levy strength and composition, because some of that will not have changed over the years.
That is true, assuming the quality of the information. So unfortunately, there's a lot of laboratory testing that's required for more advanced analyses. And even though many of those points are useful from a stratigraphy perspective, they don't have the laboratory testing that's needed for the more detailed analyses. Correct.
President Palmer, I believe Director Martin has a question.
Director Martin, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Palmer. I had my hand up for a while, but I
First, I'd be able to see the hands on this thing, and I don't see them, ladies.
That's all right. That's fine. That's fine. First of all, Damaris, I very much appreciate the presentation. The scope and breadth of our work that we have in front of us to complete on this is pretty impressive and obviously very critical to the overall effort. So first question would simply be, can we expect, Graham, perhaps to see this kind of an update in the future on a perhaps hopefully a regular basis so we can follow the progress of the work? And secondly, there's areas where Damaris identified that we're having trouble getting permissions and authorizations to move in and do the work. Is it obviously our hope is to take those barriers down and get in and do the work, but I guess I would ask, is it our plan then to add data as we get it? And will there be a point in time where this slow-moving operation, and necessarily a slow-moving operation of some subsurface investigation, starts producing results that we may be able to see and hear more about? That'd be my question.
Okay, I think I forgot the first part. I had an answer.
Senior moment, guys. Okay.
Well, my first part was basically expressing my appreciation for the presentation.
Yeah, I remember it, Director Martin. I'm sorry. It was, can you expect to get this type of update regularly? And the answer is yes. We will update
Yes.
it again, likely. We are providing these updates periodically, and Damaris has planned out the spring, summer, and fall programs, which will probably be it for the current phase of investigation. And so, yes, we would be happy to come back and report to the board our progress and talk about how those.
Well, will those, yeah, I appreciate hearing that. Will those updated reports start to include results or some conclusions we may have reached from the programs?
So there is a limitation in many cases in terms of public distribution of this information. A lot of times the documentation within the entry documentation requires that the information be treated as confidential. And also in terms of what we're doing with the information, we are updating delta-wide geologic conditions and providing this information to DWR for their review of alternatives and evaluation. So I don't know that there will be a whole lot to share in terms of what it all means, just because of some of those limitations.
All right, understood. Thank you very much.
Have any other board members? And now I have on my computer, I can see everybody's thing, and I have my audio off, ladies, so don't worry. Okay, so any other board members with comments? No? Okay, then do we have any public comment on this one, Claudia?
Have somebody from the public that has raised their hand. James Crowder, give me one moment.
Can everyone hear me?
Can, thank you.
All right. Thank you. I just, since it was not mentioned, I just wanted to inform the board that the initial study and the M&D that the geotechnical investigations rely on is currently being litigated. So I would just wanted to put that out there so y'all were aware, because that was not mentioned. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. Okay, any other member of the public?
Palmer, I do not see any other public comment requests.
Very much then. Let's move on then to item B, 7B, which is the field work activities. Wait, we just did that. Sorry about that. 7C, which is the DCA policy against discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. And this is something where we would be adopting a resolution. So could you continue with that?
So President Palmer, I will just open this up and then hand it over to Marcy Scott, our HR manager, to review the policy update. But this is the DCA establishing essentially our position on the subject. And this is very important for us as a foundational step so that we have established a policy and have something to grow on as we continue to develop the organization and consider how to manage this issue. So with that, I think, Marcy, you can take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Graham. Hello, directors. Marcy Scott, Human Resources Manager. Before you today is a recommendation to approve a resolution which will adopt the DCA's policy against discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. And this is before you today for several reasons. As Graham mentioned, we are building the foundation for future personnel management. And we're also seeing an increasing trend in in-person attendance in meetings in the DCA workspace as we finally are trying to come out of the COVID environment. And we have DCA workers, DWR employees, state agency representatives and water agency representatives, and a wide variety of people. And we think it's important to define the federal requirements as well as the broader mandates that are in California state law, as well as the process for any complaints to be raised, as well as how they will be addressed. And as a reminder, we don't have any employees right now, but we also feel it's important to communicate clearly with the contracting agencies on our process, and that we will collaborate with them to work together if we do need to address and resolve a problem. And overall, I think it's just best practice to be clear on what the expectations are for our workspace so that we can ensure a professional and appropriate workspace for everyone. And so that concludes my comments and my overview. I'm happy to respond to any questions.
Have any questions from the board? I don't see any hands on mine. No? Okay. Robert, anything? Okay, it looked like a good thing to me. You got the age thing in there, which I was glad to see. At any rate, okay. So how about public comment? Anything on public?
I have any public comment requests?
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Then let us move on. Wait a minute, I lost
So
my.
President Palmer, we are adopting, or we are recommending
Wait a minute.
adoption.
And do we have a recommendation? Do we have a motion, please?
I move the item for approval. Martin.
Second.
I'll second that motion, Millibar.
Director Millibar,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Atwater,
Yes.
Director Estremera,
Aye.
Director Chang,
Aye.
and Director Lamoureux, alternate Director Lamoureux, sorry.
Yes.
Excellent. Resolution passes. And I do want to just acknowledge that I have Director Martin as a first and Director Estremera as a second.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are all set with that. Now let's move on to staff reports and announcements. And by the way, oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Marcy. That was well done.
Thanks, President Palmer. I think I'm up first to the legal counsel report. I just wanted to take an opportunity to kind of walk through some of the new rules related to teleconference meetings that will take effect January 1st. There's a summary of those rules in my written report in the packet. And I have to admit that my written report is already out of date because, as you likely have heard, since the report was included, the governor has announced that the statewide declaration of emergency for the COVID-19 pandemic will sunset at the end of February of next year. This does have an important potential change to our ability to utilize the very flexible teleconference rules that we're currently using under AB 361. And which were included in the new legislation, which takes effect January 1st, AB 2449. And that those rules are conditioned upon there being a statewide declaration of emergency. And with that moving forward, that likely will prevent our ability from using those flexible rules after February. I would note that there is some ambiguity in the statute about whether it is possible to continue meeting remotely under those rules if state and local health officials are continuing to recommending social distancing. So that's something we're trying to chase down to make sure we're not missing the opportunity. But assuming that's the case, after beginning March 1st, there will be two ways in which this board can utilize teleconferencing at its meetings. The first will be just the traditional rules that have been in place before the pandemic. And as a reminder, those allow any of the directors to participate from a remote location, as long as that remote location is accessible to the public and listed on the agenda. As we've discussed previously, we do recognize, folks traveling up from Southern California, there may be benefits in establishing satellite meeting locations, likely with your member agency. We do anticipate reaching out to them to work to try to get that open if the board would like to explore it. In addition, AB 2449 does permit calling in from a remote location which is not accessible to the public or listed on the agenda in certain instances. And in particular, you have to satisfy either a just cause or an emergency standard. Just cause and emergency are both defined in the statute, but emergency is effectively a medical emergency. Just cause is childcare, a medical emergency, or traveling for DCA business. There are some practical limitations on attending from remote locations under that statute. First, there are limits on the numerical number of times you can do it, depending on which one you're using. Second, a quorum, if a single director is calling in from a remote location that's not accessible to the public, a quorum of the entire board needs to be in the same physical location. So for our purposes, four of the board would always need to be in person in this room. In addition to that, there are requirements to identify anyone over the age of 18 who may be in the room with you when you're calling in from a remote location, as well as a general discussion of your relationship to that person. Understand these are very detailed requirements, and to be frank, we're still in the process of kind of digesting it and understanding how it would work in practice. And so after speaking with Graham and Claudia, we do anticipate bringing in a more detailed item for discussion to the board at a future meeting well in advance of February, so we can kind of discuss the requirements and get some feedback about ways the board may wish to move forward with remote meetings. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Hope that the virus is paying attention to what Governor Newsom has said, and that by February 23rd, it's going to be over. So pay attention, virus. Okay. Any questions? No? Any public comment? Nope. Okay. Let's move on then from General Counsel's report. Have anything else to add, Josh?
That's all I had. Thank you.
Treasurer's report then.
Good afternoon, everybody. So this report is your July, August to September report. And so as of end of September, we had a little over $3.4 million, and that represents contribution from the Department of Water through the DCO office. Those are payments for obligations that we've incurred. And so after we've paid some bills, we were left with $448,271. And that was as of September, and we will update you every 3 months, so we're a little behind, but we have always around $500,000 on hand. But that also exclude the $500K as our seed money or advanced dollars that we have for emergency items or bills that we have to pay as we anticipate some of the money they bring us. As you can see, in September, we also had receivable over $3.4 million, and that consisted of about 16 invoices that we needed to pay. So we continue to do the work and working with Graham's office to make sure that we're reconciled and make sure our books are correct. So we continue to do that. And as of September, we were reporting our year-to-date expenses for about 2.5 million, a little bit lower budget. Again, this is a reflection of all the bills that we've paid, not always what receipts Graham has received. So that's the report. We have all the attachments to this report there for your view, and any questions, I can take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions from the board members, please? None? Director Martin, I thought I saw your mouth moving, but you're on mute.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, anybody else?
President Palmer, I do have one question for Catano. Good report. I guess one of my questions, and maybe I'm not seeing here, so it doesn't appear that there's any long-term investments that we're making with the cash on hand?
We do have an account with B of A, so any cash, as you can see, we're always left with very little. Money comes, so the way it works, we receive the bills, we send out the bills and say, we need money. DCO holds a very tight control of the dollars, so they will send us the money and we'll pay the bills. So we'll always have a little balance, and that little balance is in an account. It might receive very little interest, but we have an account with B of A for that investment. But we don't have a lot of money that we actually can invest because we are always running around trying to pay the bills. So we don't have a chunk of money. To your point, if we ever start issuing bonds and we have a lot of cash on hand, and you will see us coming and talking about investments and how we're investing money. But right now, it's really receive money, pay the bills, receive money, pay the bills, and we're left with a very tiny amount of money that is invested in that account in B of A, earning very little interest because it's really just anticipating to pay bills.
Anything else? Anybody else?
Does that answer your question?
Yes, Catano. I just want to confirm that, I didn't see anything that was long-term, so
You're very correct. The day we have a substantial amount of money we're investing and holding, you'll see us do investment, but we're not there yet.
President Palmer.
Okay, then we have any verbal reports from anyone? Anybody from the board have anything to say as a verbal report? No? Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay, then I do believe we have anything for future agenda items. I know you put the 7D off to a future agenda, so that's coming up. Other than that, anything? Okay, great.
And before we conclude, President Palmer, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge that alternate director Royce Fast and alternate director Dan Flory are also on the line.
Thank you.
Oh, the meeting is adjourned and it is what time? Whatever the time is. Yes. 2:55. Thank you.